All right, well, welcome. Today we have with us Asset Integrity Authority Lionel Roberts. I also have with me Greg Alvarado, as always. Hi, Greg. Nice to see you.
Peace out, dude.
I think that's for the end, but we're just at the beginning here. So, Lionel, thanks for joining us today. How's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, no problem. So, your official title is Asset Integrity Authority, but I don't think that really speaks to the depth of knowledge that you have. I know you as I guess I want to make sure I get it right. Is it a corrosion? I know you as a corrosion and materials engineer. Is that what you would consider your background being, or do I have it wrong?
Well, I guess, from, I guess, my education, it was a degree in metallurgy,
Metallurgy.
metallurgical engineer,
Okay.
metallurgical engineering. And yeah, so from that, I guess, if I was to get into my experience, it definitely rolled into corrosion and mechanical integrity, for sure.
Yeah. What made you get into way back in the day? What drew you into the metallurgy field?
Well, it was probably more of a process of elimination, to tell you the truth. I guess the engineering program we had back in Atlantic Canada here or Nova Scotia was an associate university program. So you did your first 2 years at any number of universities, and then you did your last three you had to finish them at the Technical University of Nova Scotia, TONS, as it was called. It's now part of Dalhousie. And when you did your last three, that's when you picked your discipline. I guess I had a degree or a diploma rather in engineering when I had to choose a discipline. And a lot of people were going into mechanical and chemical and industrial, and there were lots of people going into mechanical. I wanted to do something different, and I didn't really want to go into mining, which was one of the other options, or industrial. And metallurgy was an option there. And I grew up fairly close to City Steel, or Cisco as it was called. And, I had several tours there. So I was familiar with the term metallurgy and metallurgists in general from the steel industry capacity. So I decided I'd try metallurgy.
Okay, nice. And was it because there's a lot of different sides and aspects within the metallurgy space? I mean, especially when it comes to being in the field, eventually getting in the field of mechanical integrity. Um,
Yeah.
was it phase diagrams that really got you excited? Was it what grain structures?
Well,
I mean, what was it that you were like, man, I don't want to do the mechanical because that's what everybody else is doing. This metallurgy thing, I like this. I'm really going to stick with this. What piece of it, or was it just like, hey, I'm in it now, and that's just what I'm going to do?
yeah, I don't think it was phase diagrams that really drew me in. I think it was looking for something a little bit different, and I thought the metallurgy aspect was a little bit more interesting when we had an opportunity to visit the university and visit the department. It was a small department, and the professor seemed friendly. The group seemed, really small and personal, and so I think that was part of it. It was very linked. It was a mining and metallurgy department. We take a mining engineering degree or metallurgical engineering, and so the program was very close to extractive metallurgy, but there were courses with regard to mechanical and physical and corrosion and I think I liked mechanical metallurgy, and I liked the corrosion courses, and had some interest in the welding courses. And once I got in the program, my interest probably skewed a little bit toward that side. Although being a small department, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to take, there wasn't a lot of variability in the courses you could take, right? But
That's fascinating to me personally because, in an earlier session, we talked about metallurgy was the difference. But I've run into so many people that attended schools like Rolla School of Mines with the University of Missouri and with Colorado School of Mines and people similar to yourself, Lionel, that had became, corrosion materials, metallurgical people. And I think it's telltale of where the need is really great. And personally, for myself, I think in the future going forward with, the new bright shiny objects like AI and all this other stuff, I think that role is going to become increasingly important. It already has been,
Yeah.
with welding engineers and other things, Lionel. And I just like to get your perspective on that. Do you think that, how do you feel that type of knowledge base fits in with how we're headed down this path to AI and everything else? Which, by the way, I'm not against AI or anything, so I don't want it to be construed as that, but just a responsible application. Because, at inspectioneering, our primary focus is guarding the gate and keeping people safe inside the plants. And of course, I know we got to make a profit at the end of the day, and those things aren't mutually exclusive, but I'm biased, and I really believe that people in roles such as yours are pivotal in the future success and safety of the industry.
Yeah, I find, I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And I find that we've come a long way, I guess, in industry. I think from when I started, I think of the evolution in industry of the codes and standards and everything where the APIs and NACE standards are developed and capturing some of the knowledge and a lot of this information, like you can use tools, you can use software packages, you can use AI. What I have found with metallurgy, it's still a little bit of a black art. And there's a lot of experience, knowledge developed through experience that you have to carry forward and apply. And so the utilization of AI and things like 571 for damage mechanisms and whatnot is excellent to have these tools, but we have to be careful not to lose that knowledge that we've gained through industry. And so I think it's important that people, study and have experience and field experience in these issues.
So then, thinking of that as kind of like an end game, and then starting back with how you started in your early days after university, um, take us on a little bit of a tour there, if you would, about how this all kind of leads to what you just mentioned.
Okay, well, I guess if I go, if I go in the way back machine and I think about still in back in university, I was in a co-op program. Metallurgical engineering was one of the first co-op programs they had. And so I was in metallurgy. I wasn't sure whether I was going to be, like I said, extractive or steel mill or anything like this. I hadn't liked certain things, but I did get a work term or two work terms at Syncrude in Fort McMurray. So, and I worked in the inspection department. And so, I mean, at that time I had 4 years, I guess when I did the 8-month work term, I had 4 years in metallurgy and I went to Syncrude. And that was the first time I ran into NDE. We did X-ray diffraction and all kinds of fancy things in university, but I had never seen MAG or dye or ultrasonics or a PMI machine. And I worked in the inspection department, having the metallurgical background a little bit, but learning that even the inspection department, seeing the testing and everything was really important and got some very good knowledge there. You were doing inspection of pressure vessels and seeing damage mechanisms, but you're also involved in the repairs and welding and choosing welding procedures and electrodes. So it was all very enlightening to go back into my final year at school having that knowledge. And so you take that knowledge, and the final year meant a whole lot more for me actually having that. Was able to ask a whole lot of different questions, having that knowledge, but it also that sort of was a work term that really opened my eyes up into what there was in the refining industry and with mechanical integrity and what we could explore with corrosion, welding, and so there was, I mean that's sort of why I went into followed the path into refining. I think from there, I did go to Come By Chance, Newfoundland, North Atlantic Refining. It wasn't time, and they hired me as a metallurgist in the inspection department. There were 3 of us in the inspection department. It was a 125,000 barrel a day plant. And that plant had an interesting past. It was originally built in the early 70s, and then it was shut down and mothballed till, say, till the late 80s, and then reopened. And so I went there in 95, I think. So I went to a plant that had been shut down for a while. They were an independent refiner, so I guess they didn't have access to a CRTC or a Shell Global or any of these knowledge bases that the majors would have. And so it was when you talk about the evolution. So I started there, like I said, as a metallurgist in the inspection department. I had 8 months of refining experience at Syncrude, and you're kind of thrown into this refinery that had been sitting idle for years. They had a hydrocracker and a visc breaker, poor man's coker as I called it. They were running some naphtha acid crudes. There was wet H2S damage. They were burning visc breaker pitch in the furnaces. So there was external corrosion on the furnaces. So I was thrown in without any really mentors, and there wasn't the tools that we see today. Like I say, 571 or 579. API 510 was probably 25 pages or something at the time. And you had to really rely on books and learn things as you went. It was a UOP licensed unit, so we had some access to UOP. They would bring UOP inspectors in for turnarounds, and there was an old UOP metallurgist by the name of Marty Potter who did the materials design there. And so I was able to work with these people, and UOP inspector we brought in all the time, Bill Allen. He really took me under his wing, and he had seen a million hydrocrackers. So by working at Combine Chains, I got to see a lot of corrosion and a lot of deterioration. And when I had to find my way through it using the best resources you could, which in those days it wasn't. You couldn't Google things, and you didn't have as many codes or textbooks, so you had to rely on people. So that was sort of my early introduction into refining and into the use of networking to get to where you need to go and to get the answers you needed. And I guess so that taught me early on that without much experience myself, that I really had to where am I going to find information? How am I going to do that? And it taught me the benefits of networking and finding those resources. So luckily, Come by Chance, I think Canaro seemed to understand this a little bit, and they had provided a pretty good training budget. So, 510 training, 570, I think I did Section 8, B31-3, and sent me to some high temperature corrosion courses with NACE. I think I did some certification, technology, corrosion technologist or something, certification with NACE at the time. And then at that time too, there was just in the late 90s, there was an incident at Come by Chance on a furnace with a couple of fatalities, unfortunately, on an NHT furnace. And so, it taught me meeting of diligence and management of change and all this. And the company decided with that incident, they were going to go national board. So we wrote a national board manual, and so I assisted with the writing and preparation for that. And I did 3 weeks of national board training in South Carolina. So after spending close to 5 years there, I left there and came over to Irving Oil.
Well, that was a great story, Lionel, and I appreciate that. And some nuggets of gold there are, I think, when you look at your varied experience and educational training base, obviously it says a lot about the importance of critical thinking skills and having a good, well-rounded background, both academically and experientially. With that in mind, because you've traversed a lot of things, you've talked about metallurgy, you've talked about inspection, you've talked about codes and standards and recommended practices. And within all that is buried operating practices and how that affects the whole thing. Thinking about the fact that you're talking to a lot of 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds right now, and you're wanting to pass along what you've learned, is there any advice or encouragement overall that you could give people about, how do I put all this stuff together? Because we live in a world today with the internet of instant gratification, and that doesn't always provide a sound basis for critical thinking through a situation. Is there anything you want to say to folks to help them in their journey?
Well, I think that, like you said, with gratification, and I think instant gratification is what people are looking for. So I think to young people, or younger people in industry, I would suggest when you see an issue, when you're inspecting something, is to be patient, ask questions, and don't necessarily run. I mean, it's important, I think, for self-learning, but I think you gotta ask people, and you gotta talk to people. And Google's fine, AI's fine, but one of the old inspectors I worked with used to say, the 80-20 rule. He said 20% is knowing the answer and 80% is knowing where to find it. But I think more so it's knowing who to find that with, and understanding who the right people are to talk to, and gaining the experience and getting the guidance from seeking out the guidance from those who've been there before, as opposed to just reading through the damage mechanisms, or reading through the codes and standards. I think there's lots of lessons to be learned through talking to people who experienced it. And I think if I go through my career further as well, I think after leaving, come by chance, I came to Irving Oil, which was another independent refiner, and only had one refinery at the time. We now have two. In both countries we operate, we have the largest refineries in both those countries. But as I came to Irving, it was an independent refiner too. Once again, I was the only metallurgist. When I started as a metallurgist at Irving Oil, when I came in the inspection department, and I think I was the only one in the department at the time who had a 510 certification. So I brought in a lot of that experience I had from Come By Chance, and was able to try to build a mechanical integrity program here. And Irving Oil was very good to me as well, and allowed me to continue to participate in NACE and API, and which I think was very important because, like I said, as an independent refiner and trying to be an SME or a technical specialist in that environment without having the experts to go to or to talk to, and with not having access to the codes and standards that people have today, once again, you're kind of on your own. And licensor practices were probably not the same as necessarily the same as an owner user practice. So when I did get to attend NACE meetings and everything, I found it fascinating to see how these people come together from various organizations, and the information exchange at NACE, or AMP, I guess it is. It was exceptional. And I said, "Wow!" I said, "How can I get more out of this?" And because I knew I really needed access to information, and so I volunteered at NACE to chair a task group. And the first task group I chaired was for material selection diagrams, and probably wasn't the one of my choice, but it was an interesting one. It was a document that had to be built from scratch. And so I chaired that. And from there, I met Kathy Shargay, helped Mark Music, helped Keith Lewis, who was at Shell Global time. They helped. And at the time, it was the quickest document from the time of the task group initiation to publication. So it's SP 407, I think, is it. And I got involved in NACE, and from there, I thought that was successful. Getting involved at NACE and API was different than just attending as well. Once you got involved and became part of the task groups, and then I did get into the overall management, I guess, of STG 34, which was the refining section at the time. And once you start to participate, then you really meet people, and and you get to see who's the expert in all these different, or who has experience in all these different categories, because no one really knows it all, and but there are people who have experience in everything. So then when I did see issues or things that I was unfamiliar with, I knew who to talk to, and people were familiar with me and a lot of times willing to share some of their history and information, and that was essential, I think, to my overall career development professionally. So back to what would I tell young people is talk to people. I would say participate in industry if you can. Look for opportunities not only to attend but to participate. And no one's expecting you to know everything, so it's okay to speak up. It's okay to ask questions when you're there, and get out and network.
Networking's come up with a lot of folks that we've talked to. More honestly, more than I thought it might. And I don't know why. Maybe I was just naive, but more and more folks have said that one of the main things that's been contributed to their growth, their career, their success, whatever way you want to say it, has been figuring out networking. Or maybe not figuring out, but at least participating and meeting people, expanding that network and getting to know folks, which, at an independent company, as you said, there's a huge amount of value there to be able to just know the right people. So you mentioned that with both companies, you had the opportunity to do and participate in a lot of the codes and standards and NACE and all those. Were they asking you? Were the companies asking you to participate, or was that you saying, "Hey, I want to go do this"?
I mean, at Come By Chance, I guess it was a little bit of both there. I mean, I don't know if I knew what I didn't know, but I was becoming aware of it. And so I was asking, and I think they were very willing to help. And but they did provide a lot of training to people, and I think it was in Newfoundland, so it was well away from the centers of like Houston and New Orleans, or I mean, so they did bring people in to do a lot of courses there, and put a lot of mechanical engineers and inspectors through the same courses. So but I think coming from where I came from, a Come By Chance, I was well aware of the opportunities in training and development. And so when I came into Irving, I remember even talking to them in the interview room, talking about continued participation in NACE and industry events. So I discussed that right off the get go. So and I did push it because I was aware and I wanted it. And I think even like I was very heavily involved, like I said, in NACE. And when I got into the steering committee at STG 34, that was an 8-year commitment. You did your secretary job, you did your vice chair, and then 2 years as past chair. So I was very, I chaired a committee. I chaired symposia at NACE, the paper symposia, and then I was asked by someone in the steering committee if I wanted to get into the steering committee. So I did go back and approached Irving at the time and said, okay, I think this is bringing value to me professionally, and I think this is bringing value to the company. Here are some examples. And I went directly to the GM and asked for his commitment for me to participate in that. So, with that, we had a great GM, Mark Sherman at the time, who had come from Syncrude, and he was very open to that. So that sort of gave me an 8-year window where I was pretty free to participate.
That's awesome I think it's awesome on many layers there, because you recognize that you need to take control of your career and the information that you needed to get. And then the company also recognized the value, and you figured out how to adequately communicate that up as well, right? To be able to sell it to the GM to let you continue doing it. So
Well, I think that's important is the sell. And you can attend NACE conferences, you can attend API conferences, you can attend the Inspector Summit, and sometimes I mean, what you bring back, what you have to bring back, and you should make sure you sell it properly, and you do a trip report, you present that to the proper people, and make sure you show that you're contributing and you have that knowledge transfer. And I think companies too, like I've seen sometimes at our company, and I think others, you'll see people at a conference and then you don't see the same people return. You'll see other people. And I understand companies do want to share the wealth and spread it around. But I think it's also very important for companies to understand and try to find out who are the people and who are the young SMEs or developing SMEs, and who are the people we should send regularly. I think that's important. I think regular participation is important to develop a good SME. and technical expertise and knowledge. And I think obviously other people, you need to get that transformation of knowledge through, but for the good of a company and for the good of an individual in development, you really do need to attend on multiple occasions, and that really develops a person. When you watch a standard develop from beginning to publication or involved in it, or you're in multiple information exchanges and you understand who is the individual who's always talking about map asset, who's the experience there, and you get more comfortable with contributing yourself. But yeah, so for companies to recognize that, I think I feel as an industry, we've lost some of that through COVID, particularly. We started doing Teams meetings and Zoom meetings and having committee meetings and things through Teams and Zoom, which is fine, particularly if you know the people who are there. But from a true networking perspective, if you're not there and meeting people, you don't really get to know people. I find as I get older in my career, and I still attend, I try to attend API and AMP regularly, and I find sometimes the committee meetings, they can get long, they can get a little boring. Sometimes you may talk about a definition for 45 minutes, and it seems less productive. But what still is really productive is the fact that the network you have and the sidebar conversations, or even the whether you have a dinner or a lunch meal, and people talk about work and you share experiences, and it's those I think those conversations I find to be the most valuable in most of the meetings I attend now.
Well, and a lot of them, I mean, well, all those sidebars, all those lunch conversations, those are all off the record. So it's easier to have more technical type conversations as well, or experience conversations. Hey, what are you guys doing for this? Or have you seen this over here? Because, anything that's on the record anymore, the lawyers just get in the way, which
For
is,
sure.
I mean that in the nicest way possible. But I think that's why we've seen, NACE, right? When it was NACE, it was fantastic. The knowledge sharing sessions were so great. We've started to see those knowledge share sessions really tail off a little bit in the amount of information that's shared when questions are asked.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't want to, well, I'll just say it like it is. A lot of times, and Lionel, I'd like to hear your perspective on this, is that I found that when the organizations and the networks tend to bow the knee to the commercial side, that's a challenge sometimes, right? Because we've got to separate the fact from the fluff. And networking sometimes with people at these conferences helps us do that because we get to chat both with fellow peers who are owner operators, and we get to chat with people who are trying to sell us technologies, and we get an opportunity to compare notes with what we're hearing. And I think that's really important. And I think you just said, Brandon, whether, I don't know if you realize it or not, but at least this is my opinion, is back when you're talking about T34, the Danny Clarita days and all that kind of stuff is sharing at NACE. And then on the chemical side too, let's not leave out chemicals. I mean, I remember a gentleman from Air Products, Sheldon Dean, was the chairman of the group that developed the original document on how do you handle equipment in anhydrous ammonia service. Talking about anhydrous stress corrosion cracking, decommissioning, recommissioning, keeping air out, oxygen out, and making sure we had a little bit of water in the vapor phase and all these things. I think we were at a pivotal time there where we were actually granted the opportunity to set the stage and write some of the seminal documents, the foundational documents that the shoulders that a lot of us sit on these days or stand on these days. But I'd like to hear your thoughts about that, Lionel, the importance of those things and the initiatives that people were doing in the information sharing, and maybe some recommendations or suggestions on how we can keep that going, or if it's not going now, get it going. But again, people that attend these conferences is people working at AFPM or the the owner operators and the consultants working at AFPM and at API and these other organizations, most of that work is gratis. We're there because we want to learn and we want to network with people, but we're not being paid for it. But yet we still have this passion and everything around it.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum there, for sure. You know, I guess, like we say, the some of the sharing seems to be a little less, and I think from the probably from the legal's perspective than it used to be. I don't know how you. I'm not sure how you break that cycle. You know, I think back a few years ago when we were starting the JIPs and high temperature hydrogen attack, and we were in a 941 meeting. I can't remember actually where it was. And there was some sharing. I think we were talking about, particularly at that time, there was some failures to the left of the curve with CD Tech units. And there were some people doing some presentations with regard to that. And there was a realization that in the room, there was jurisdictional and regulator people in the room. And that shut down some of the presentations right away. And that would be a shame, you know, because that sort of thing is a shame when you can't share that type of information amongst owner users without having to worry about jurisdiction and regulatory environments, because you know, I mean, that's safety information, and you need to be able to freely share that information to for the betterment of industry.
So yeah, sorry, just to clarify there. So when you say to the left of the curve, and so you're talking the Nelson curves that were developed. And so anything that they were basically empirically created curves, or I've heard it as they laid a French curve down and said, here, along this is where failures were. And so anything left or below of that curve,
Left or below, yes,
should have been operating in what we would have called the safe area. And so what you're saying is that there were some presentations that showed that there were some failures in that safe area. And so people stopped speaking because regulators might have had issues with that. That's kind of what you're getting at there.
Yeah, and at the time we were trying to determine there were some local failures particularly on flanges around wells with cracking, and we're trying to determine one, if it was truly a more localized version of high temperature hydrogen attack, and also, I mean, as an industry, and we were trying to determine how we were calculating the hydrogen partial pressures and the operating windows to determine really where that was and how accurate the curves were. So, you know, a lot of work has been done with the JIPs and I think on 941, but that early information sharing, you know, while we were working on that, or the presentation of that information may have been stymied a little bit due to the concerns.
Well, you bring up that. Go ahead, Brandon. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that's sad, right? Because you're in a technical space, you're with technical people having technical conversations and presentations. And, you know, that's a place for everybody to be able to see, hey, maybe there is something wrong. Maybe we are not quite doing it right. And if that conversation is stymied, now either those conversations don't happen, those thoughts don't happen, or they get delayed.
I think I think maybe they get delayed and that information just doesn't get out to as many people as early as maybe it should.
Yeah.
You know, I think all that information was probably worked on, you know, was used in the JIPs that were out there, both the equity engineering JIP and the stress JIP. And so, you know, but that's it's a little bit more of a closed group JIPs if you're participating in that. And so as to get out to the general public or the general owner user, that could potentially delay that.
Yeah, and you know that HTHA JIP series, our series of JIPs that occurred, I remember it starting back in probably the early 90s with, I think it was DNV that might have led, and Bob Odette from UCSB, they were using his stuff for hydrogen fugacity, things like that. And it just went on for so long, but I only mention that to say that if you were an inspection engineer, you know, somebody who's like half top level inspector, half para corrosion materials kind of person, how important is it for them to be interested in this type of thing? You know, beyond just check the box off. This is what 510 said, or check the box off. This is what 570 said. Is there do you think there's a carrot or some kind of motivation that can exist or should exist in the people that kind of fall in between the corrosion materials engineer and the inspection engineer, that you would give some advice about learning and, not checking off the box, but questioning it more, interrogating it more to find solutions to problems?
Well, that's one of the things I always talk to. I try to talk to, I guess, our inspection folk and our maintenance engineering folk at the refinery about is just to question things. And I will oftentimes too, when I see an inspection report come out, and I'll look at it now. I will often go back, question the inspector about what what they saw, what they think they saw. Why did they say it was? Why did they assume it was stress corrosion cracking or chloride stress corrosion cracking? And a lot of times I ask those questions knowing the answer, but I try to challenge them on it to get them thinking about it. And I think too, like I talked about my evolution or anything, but I think just in industry, and I don't know how particular it is in industry throughout, but when I started at Irving Oil, like I said, I may have been the only one with a 510 at that time. Well, I think all the inspectors, have 510, 570, and a lot of them have 571 training. Now, at the time, most, only, I think when I first started, there was only four Irving Oil inspectors in the group, and there were some contract inspectors. Now, the contract inspectors all came at that time from the NDE ranks. So they may have been a UT hand, an RT hand, a mega die guy, and they were hired in or they were contracted as inspectors. And some of them developed into fantastic inspectors, but a lot of them I found were very task oriented, like I said, and so they became they weren't necessarily inspectors as such, but they became NDE task managers. They were checking boxes of, well, I need to get MAG done, I need to get die done, I need to get UT done, and so they didn't necessarily have that critical thinking, and they probably weren't as educated today, or educated as guys are today with damage mechanisms and such. Now, today, if I look at the group, there's still a few NDE hands in there, and they're very good. There's a lot of young engineers in the inspection department as well, and that's so they don't have the NDE knowledge maybe that some of these guys would do, but the critical thinking questions that are being asked and the desire to understand the damage mechanisms and understand the process seems to be better. And we do provide probably more training for those people as well. I think with the introduction of CCDs, I guess, and IOWs, I think that brought a lot together too brought process engineering, brings process engineering and inspection together. And I think, you always have your materials corrosion engineer sort of sitting in the middle. And, but by having your IOWs, having your CCD documents, and then providing training to the group of both inspectors and process engineers, they get to see how a damage mechanism works, or what variables cause and relate to the damage and how that does. And when they start to understand the chain, whether it's a process engineer starting to understand more than just production and understanding that there's impacts there, and then when you bring the process in for into the inspector, I think that and give them the opportunity to see the relationship there, and operations as well. People start asking a lot more questions, and the knowledge does transfer.
Yeah. Yep. And not to forget the mechanical side too, right? Because as inspection professionals, we have to be concerned with fitness for service. That's
Yes.
very important in how we play into that.
Yes, very much so.
So you're saying from the process side, we can't just run our equipment into the ground to make money?
Well, we'll try not to, or maybe that materials corrosion engineer will try to be the conscience of the organization to make sure that everyone's aware that all things have a design life,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
metal does want to, by nature, metal does want to go back to its most simple form.
Entropy, right?
Thank you for listening to Upon Further Inspection, a mechanical integrity podcast. This episode was co-created by Inspectioneering and Core Solutions. Our producers are Nick Schmoyer, Jocelyn Christie, and Jeremiah Wooten. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal or professional advice. Listeners should seek their own qualified advisors for guidance. If you enjoyed this episode, please join us next time wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until then, stay safe and stay informed.